it's also something that, frankly, I get a lot of like just personal joy from working in. And I think that if you're going to spend so much of your time and career building and working on something, anytime you can try to attach it to your personal joy, you're just going to get so excited to wake up every morning and lean into it. And so this for me was kind of a big unlock of, hey, if I can make entertaining content that tells you something about a product or service, number one, you're going to enjoy, watching it and being entertained by it. And B, I can probably convey some of that value much better than I did before. So that was a key unlock for me, and a lot of those shows and series did that. It's also one of the things that I was really excited to bring to the Knot when I joined.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
You have got to make yourself vulnerable if you want to be in the profession of marketing, because this is an ideas industry. We have to put our ideas out there to our business leaders, to our clients, and ultimately to the world. And at least for me, those ideas, I get attached to them. They are a piece of me. So when they hit, oh, wow, what a great feeling. However, many times they don't. Ouch, a swing and a miss. But you got to take that body blow and just keep moving forward, which is why I love this lesson from my next guest. Resilience is the key to success and mental health. Here to share the, I assume, somewhat painful story behind that lesson, but also many more joyous lessons and stories, is Kiara Kempski, Vice President, Global Consumer and Vendor Marketing at The Knot Worldwide. Thanks for joining me, Kiara.
Yes. Hello, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to share some of my war stories, insights with everyone.
We're going to have fun. And first, I got to mention, as someone named Daniel Burstein, which does not roll off the tongue, Kiara Kempski is just a name made for podcasting. Like the alliteration there with those hard kids, I love that. But before we jump into your stories, I want people to understand who I'm talking to. So let's take a quick look at your background. Kiara was a senior marketing manager for Yapstone, senior director of brand media and global programming at Ancestry. And for the past 3 years, Kiara has been at The Knot Worldwide, where she is now Vice President of Global Consumer and Vendor Marketing. The Knot was a public company traded on NASDAQ until 2018, when parent company XO Group merged with WeddingWire to form a privately held company in a $933 million buyout deal. Today, The Knot Worldwide connects nearly 4 million couples with approximately 900,000 wedding professionals per year. And Kempski leads a team of 150 marketers at The Knot. So, Kiara, give us a sense. What is your day like as Vice President of Global Consumer and Vendor Marketing?
Oh, man. Well, I'd have to say first, every day is different. It depends. And I think I start my day in particular prepared for the level of context switching that I'm going to have to go into on any given day, whether that's I'm, going deep on brief reviews for campaigns or kind of brand strategy teams, or we're going deep into, data triage for my B2B marketing teams on that front. So every day is a little bit different, but one of the things that makes it true is consistent, is that we are super focused on really understanding our couples that are coming to us, that are looking for planning help, and the same thing with how we're going to support our pros that are also looking for us to be connected to couples. So we spend most of my day really kind of thinking about that big problem space, and how do I make sure that the rest of my team is actively thinking about solving that too.
What a great just overall explanation of what it means to be a marketer. On the one hand, there's that constant context switching, like you said. I like that term because we got to jump around to too many things. But the one constant, hopefully, is the people we serve. So I love hearing that. So let's take a look at some of the lessons from the things you made. I like to say I've never been a podiatrist or an actuary or some other profession, but I do feel like as marketers, we get to make things. And that's a little special about our industry. I always love that. We make brands, we make campaigns. So your first lesson, you said, find a business problem and recommend a solution, which I love. At first glance, it sounds kind of obvious though, right? So walk us through this. How'd you learn this? Take us into this story.
Yes, no, I'd be happy to. I think it's funny. It seems so simple, but yet, like, I don't feel like we actually learn that until much later in our career. Like in the
Right.
beginning, you're
Yeah.
trying to think about like, what do I need to learn? What's my value? How, my role, and how do I stand out? And what role am I, playing or delivering? And some of those kind of introspection. And so I think it really comes in a little bit later in your career where you start to really think about, oh, wait, like I really need to think about how am I bringing value to this organization, or how am I bringing value to a customer, or what's needed. And I have found that if you can really suss out and figure out what is either a business problem or a customer problem to attack, then you're just going to be set up for the most success long term. And after you solve one, move to the next, move to the next. It also just makes really strong strategy. The ways that I've kind of tried to narrow in a little bit and really find what those are, which ones to pick and which ones to solve, is I've really leaned into a lot of like customer listening data. That's always been kind of tried and true. Sometimes I think we can discredit kind of qualitative data a little bit too early. And so I love looking at open end qual research, and kind of finding out some of those open ends, and how questions are certain answered. I love looking through our social comments and figuring out what our customers or even fans of our brand are using, or saying about us, or thinking about. A super relevant example for me when I first joined the Knot was when I was looking at some of the marketing and the marketing programs and what we had done. It was really clear that our playbook and our strategy was super focused on the needs of millennial audiences, the way they planned, hyper detailed, right? The resources they were looking at for inspiration, where they were consuming media, right? Today's Show playing a big role, and things like that. And it was clear that we weren't super focused on the customer of tomorrow, which we all know, and there's a lot of talk around it, is Gen Z. But there was a pivotal moment where it was like, oh, wow, we deeply need to learn this user and what their pain points are, and how different that might be than the user pain points we were solving before. And so that created a lot more of kind of, in some ways, that forced, but really like embracing that learning across the marketing organization. Little things we would start doing was I would have our PR team send all of our executives kind of Gen Z latest trends memos, competitive insight, to really start nurturing some of that learning and education, and what they're thinking about, so we could build for it. It also started to think about and challenge, if you would do a side by side of your audience today and the influencers we were picking and working with, and how does that compare to the audience of tomorrow and what we're solving for? So finding little ways to kind of move us towards, hey, customer problem, opportunity, what all needs to change, as we really start to lean into that audience, and what we need to evolve. So that was a huge kind of pivot for us, but it really started from this opportunity of like, our customers changing, we got to change with them, we got to figure that out. And now it's led to most of our kind of prompts or meetings will start with, this is the customer business problem that I'm solving today, or hey, this brief really addresses this customer pain point. And so I look at it as a huge way that I know my team is now thinking in the right direction. And it took little tactics, little ways to get there.
That's great. Can you think of a specific example of something you learned about the customer, about that Gen Z customer, and how you learned it, and then how you went to solve it? Because I joked around and said a little about like, okay, find a business problem, recommend a solution. Well, that seems
Yeah.
obvious, right? But it's so often not done. And the one thing I see often is, yes, people find a business problem. I think this is really prevalent in B2B especially, but even in B2C, yes, companies find a business problem, they try to solve it, but it is the seventh most important business problem to that target customer, right? It's not the most pressing things, right? And when you see that value proposition, you're like, well, it's true they should want this thing, but this isn't the burning hot desire. And add to that, like you mentioned, the changes that you have to constantly keep up with. So at one point it was the burning hot desire, but now it's not. For example, with AI, that has changed a lot for what companies are looking for, right? They might have been looking for a manual solution or something at the point, AI solving that. And when you talk about the wedding industry, it's funny, I mentioned to my wife that I was interviewing someone from the Knot, and because we got married, my gosh, like 24 years ago. And even back then, I think she was looking at the Knot. And I think
Yeah.
about over that time, how much it's changed to mean to get married, just societal changes about what marriage is, technology changes. I mean, we didn't have social media at our wedding. So that's hard to keep up with. So can you unpack for us and think about like, how did you find like, okay, this is a really pressing business problem. It's not like a kind of low problem on our list. And then here's how we're going to solve it, like a specific one.
Yeah, no, sure. I'll think of a kind of an easy example, and then potentially a kind of more um, complex or macro one. But sometimes the customer problem was as easy as, so when you're thinking about, and our customers, when they're thinking about wedding planning, one of the first most important aspects of that planning is the inspiration phase, right? Like you have to know what your couple vibe, what your style is, what does that mean before you can pick, okay, the venues I'm going to go look for, the budget I'm going to need, right? This inspiration phase is actually the first part of that decision journey. And so one of the things that we know and that we recognize is where our couples generationally were seeking that inspiration were vastly different. And so platforms, for example, social play a huge role in that. Where in the past, Pinterest was, and pinning and seeking inspiration there was a huge part of that journey. Now we're starting to see that, oh wow, TikTok started to rise, and there's over 1 billion views for like wedding talk, right? And so how are we intercepting that conversation, or what role is that actually playing, because it was nowhere on our radar previously. So little things like that of like, oh, inspiration is now playing a bigger part of that journey. So where are we moving, and what do we need to do? I also think another kind of macro example was there were kind of perceptions that we had around the role and importance of marriage to given couples, right? So this idea of, oh, younger generations are less interested in getting married and the significance of it, right? And we were starting to see some rise of interest in, like, love celebrations, this kind of formality of marriage and the documentation of it and the significance of merging finances and things like that were becoming a difficult point for newer generations. When we really started to dig in and unpack that data point, right? What does that mean exactly? That's where we started to see, no, there's not really a lack of interest in Gen Z of overall getting married. It is the pressure and formality that older generations had put on it that gave that perception. When we started to actually listen in and do some surveying against Gen Zs, they were like, no, we're so excited to find a partner. We have such hopes for one day getting married and enjoying it. My wedding or my celebration will just look different. It might be, a celebration of love. It might be, a different type of fun-filled weekend or day experience. And so some of that perception of headwind data, it was a trigger point for us to go a little bit deeper to truly understand what was that. Now, how do we tailor our messaging accordingly, right? Do we want to say wedding all the time? Do we want to introduce celebration, right? Let's plan your celebration into some of our marketing. And so it really starts to even help how we think about changing the language that we use as well.
No, that's great. Some of the things that have been most helpful for me in my career is, I mean, you mentioned surveys, but just other ways too of seeing the language the customer uses to talk
Yeah.
about that thing, because it can be different than us. And so, back in the day, you had to do like a focus group or something like that. But now, yeah, go on social media, look at reviews, go look at forums. Like sometimes that word or the way you're thinking of it, it's just a minor difference. And then boom, you hit them right between the eyes because you're speaking their language.
Yeah, it's great. Exactly.
So you mentioned things like looking at for inspiration on TikTok and Pinterest, and it gets me thinking of, that's inspiration. It's also entertainment, and not only has weddings changed over the past years, but my gosh, entertainment has too. It's become okay. There's still the big time entertainment, movies and TV shows. There's all this, consumer generated entertainment like social media. And you mentioned entertainment is powerful for brand building, which is so true. So how did you learn that lesson, and how have you applied that in your career?
Yes. I'm excited to talk about this. So, I think the biggest, so if anyone is familiar with Ancestry and Ancestry.com and as a brand, you have probably heard of or seen one of our entertainment shows. It was NBC's show, Who Do You Think You Are? Then we had Long Lost Family on TLC, on cable. We also had and worked with Henry Louis Gates on Finding Your Roots, which is on PBS. And I was a huge part of bringing a lot of that programming to life and really kind of seeing how monumentally impactful that can be to creating a category and really driving demand and interest in the category. At the time when I was at Ancestry, I was trying to think about, because it's a niche category, right? It's a niche hobby. In many ways, you're trying to think about like kind of what's your industry parallel or what's the greatest competition. And at that time, the greatest competition was actually like gardening, right? Because it's this hobby that's pulling away time. And so how do we start to create those parallels of like, no, it's like you can get joy from this. Like this is a hobby as well that can actually be pretty life changing if you do it, invest the time. And so we found that this long form storytelling of entertainment was just massively inspirational to getting users to think about the joy, the things that they could actually uncover. Long form storytelling needed to play a bigger role in conveying that more than sort of a static, social ad could really do. And so when we started to invest in programming and really started to expand that for our new product features as they came out, nothing quite moved the business and moved interest and demand for our products and services the way entertainment-based programming is, or the way that it did. And it was just hugely transformative and led to some of the, massive evaluation and product sales that we were able to achieve at that time. It's also something that, frankly, I get a lot of like just personal joy from working in. And I think that if you're going to spend so much of your time and career building and working on something, anytime you can try to attach it to your personal joy, you're just going to get so excited to wake up every morning and lean into it. And so this for me was kind of a big unlock of, hey, if I can make entertaining content that tells you something about a product or service, number one, you're going to enjoy, watching it and being entertained by it. And B, I can probably convey some of that value much better than I did before. So that was a key unlock for me. And a lot of those shows and series did that. It's also one of the things that I was really excited to bring to the Knot when I joined, which was like, if you think about how many existing entertainment series or shows exist in wedding, right? You've got the Say Yes to the Dress franchise, which is massive. You also have a ton of just like kind of bridezilla tropes and shows and series that exist within that space, and 90 Day Fiancés and some of these, every dating show possible, right? There's just so much in that connection, marriage, wedding, journey down the aisle show that exists that just created an opportunity for us to really think about, okay, hey, I know this can work over here. Hey, there's already a lot here with no brands owning that space and no narratives, right, that we can really shape. There's no one really quite telling the story that go into wedding professionals and the roles that they play, right? The artistry behind it, all the work that goes into it, right? A lot of the amazing before and after. So there's a lot of parallels that I observed with the things we were solving for on the ancestry side that I'm excited to really embark on for the Knot, that I think we can have the same level of success as well.
Can you give us a sense for one of those shows, one of those examples, and tell us how you align the value proposition of the show with the value proposition of the brand? Because I love to hear what you're saying. I can imagine someone listening and saying, "Well, I'm not going to get a show on NBC like Kiara. I'm not Seinfeld. I'm not going to do my Cheers or whatever." But yeah. I think what you're saying, it's not just. I don't think you were just successful personally because of the exposure from being on a big network. I think that's part of it, of course.
Yeah.
To me, why those things work is it's something I'm always trying to teach, always trying to tell. Show, don't tell. Show, don't tell.
Yep.
And so I saw an example today. We're gonna with a small music company, and that's why I think it can work for any company that has a software, and they've got a video on the page, and they're saying, "Oh, this is a great software. It's a great software." Versus, hey, wouldn't it be fun to make 10 videos and say, here's a cool song. Here's how I made it with the software, right? And that, to your point, that becomes entertainment. That becomes what I would call also content marketing. And it's effective not just because of exposure. It's effective because you're not selling, right? You're just telling someone, you're helping them something. So can you give us a sense? Because I think whether anyone listening has a show on NBC or not, they need to know, okay, how would I build something that's helpful for the audience that also communicates a value proposition, that's entertaining and communicates a value proposition?
No, absolutely. And to be honest, like I think the root principles apply in a digital environment as well, right? It's not just being on those networks or unlocking that. I think the core foundation of it and where I kind of associate the way that it can work for a lot of different brands or businesses is really, number one, what branded entertainment allows you to do is it allows you to make your product fun and a part of whether it's the everyday use or the lived experience of your customer, right? You're really showing them the role that it can play, and you're able to kind of show the fun that it can actually have in that life or to that user or to that protagonist in the series or show. I think the other thing that makes it really compelling and that worked particularly well on the ancestry side was that it actually allows you to show the discovery. You can show the unlock, right? The business value that was achieved, or the kind of proof point of value in a cinematic way. And so at Ancestry, it was really like, oh wow, that person or that celebrity discovered that thing. Oh, I can maybe discover that thing also on that platform. Or hey, I can actually have a wedding like that. I never thought that was possible, right? There's this element of really showing that discovery and that aha moment, that is just so well told, in kind of longer form content. And I think the other key element, which applies to other channels as well or other tactics, is really you have an endorser, right? You have someone that is actually either showing how it's being used, right? And they're your guide through that, or you're leveraging a celebrity or a talent to actually create some of that endorsement, implied endorsement behind it. That's a core principle around why influential or influencer marketing works so incredibly well, and being able to kind of do that and show that. And so anytime you can leverage someone, to be a little bit of that endorser of the usage or the product, or kind of showing it some of that testimonial impact, that's a core principle that makes branded entertainment work so well.
So now we're talking about this show on NBC. We're talking about some of these different shows. These are great, but I am sure to get there, your career is littered with these great ideas that never saw the light of day, right? Because I know mine is. Like, I love, like, I agree. I love content marketing. I love entertainment. I love, putting out to the audience. But to do that, you got to swing and miss a lot. So, I love when I read a podcast guest application. One of the lessons like hits me right in the chest and I feel it. And then to me, that was this lesson from you. You said resilience is the key to success and mental health. I love that you added that as well. So take
Yeah.
us through, like, I mean, I assume you must have had some pretty big misses in your career to feel that, right? I mean, we all have, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I think if you're not missing, you're not swinging enough. And as a
Yeah.
marketer, like, it is our job to be the tip of that spear. It is to be at the forefront of innovation and helping both our customers think about it as well as the business, right, in many ways. And how can we be at the tip of that? And that does not come without some risk, but also like huge rewards. I'll also say too, I was reflecting on this when I was kind of sharing this insight with you, that I most recently I was looking at the work that Bumble had done, for example, that had come up with some criticism recently. And I think that I like to observe and learn from a lot of other brands on what they're doing, and see if there is a miss anywhere, would we have spotted that miss, right? How would we have responded to that? What room would we have been in to identify and really think about it, right? Because I view the craft of marketing as this continually learned experience, and all of our peers and all other marketing leaders, we're learning from each other, right? This podcast being a great example of that. But there is not a senior marketer, a VP, a CMO out there that I can tell you that is not afraid of failure. And in today's culture, having that fear of a brand crisis is immense. And I do think at times that fear can limit our creativity, and it starts to water down some of the creativity and innovation that we could be having. And so how do we build resilience, or kind of pre-plan some of this resilience into the way that we think and what we do, so that the craft of marketing can still remain that bold, amazing place that so many of us have built our careers and we just love working in and for. And so I do think it's important to build this sense of resilience, both in you, the individual, knowing that, like, I'll try something and I can fail. But one thing I know for sure is that I will rise smarter. And if you really anchor to this idea of, like, no matter what it is, I'm going to rise smarter and I will survive this thing, whatever that is, there's so much power in that, I find, both for mental health, but also for innovation within marketing. And so there have been numerous times, gosh, I've worked on product launches or product tests, right? Where you're just like, oh my gosh, we have built so much money into this product launch that just, didn't get traction. It didn't build up traction the way that we had expected that it would. Or a great one, gosh, there's been so many brand campaigns or ads created. One that comes to mind is, I'll use Ancestry, and I can share some other more recent ones, but we were taking on this insight at Ancestry that was such a huge learning for us, which we were trying to solve this customer problem. Okay, going back to customer problem. We were trying to solve this customer problem at that time around customer urgency, right? We were noticing that, like, couples are waiting. I'm sorry, not couples. people were waiting for retirement to use our product, or when they had maybe time off and some of this idle time to jump into this new hobby. But one of the things that we were trying to solve from a business perspective was like, hey, how do we actually drive some urgency for people earlier in their life, because we were starting to see insights around the things that people were discovering were actually having a meaningful impact on the way that they lived their life today. And so this idea being, hey, if you start early, you'll actually be able to extract a lot more value from the experience and shape your life. So we were like, okay, we're going to start with customer stories, and we're going to pull out some testimonials that are really talking about how people's lives were transformed through this experience. And then we're going to make an ad campaign about it. And it's going, oh my gosh, that's the magic. It's got testimonials, so we know it's anchored to real, product stories, and so that'll be a sure example of it. And oh, this problem is huge and it's big enough to be solved. So we go through and make some of the best creative ever, hire, top 10 agency, and spent a lot of money in doing it. And this is one where the strategy being right, but execution not is kind of that sub context here that I learned. But one of the things we figured out was the examples that we were showing were pretty say out there. They were pretty extreme, right? We had examples where people had quit their jobs and moved and done a passion of theirs, or they had discovered a brewing recipe in their family tree that had created, they wanted to start their own brewery, or had kind of changed huge aspects of their life. And users came back and they were like, that's amazing. I don't want to change my life. Or like, hey, that might be true, but that feels really unbelievable that you could be so inspired by something and kind of transform your life. And so that was one where we were like, goodness, great strategy, wrong execution. It really fell flat and it didn't move what we needed it to do at the time. And so, I've also done, even in the smallest sense, right, of I have, and I'm sure we can all, if you're heavy into testing, which
Absolutely.
most marketers are, and you're thinking about that, running a test and not letting it run long enough, right? Something as small as that, of just like calling something too quick, or we're going to look for statistical significance against, traffic or something to that degree. But there are elements where not calling things, or not having the right channel mix, or some of those other elements that you learn through testing and you really figure out. But some of those things are just every day, like, oh, that was a miss. We could have pursued that. And so you extend something longer, or you run another version of it, or redoing something. But those things, big or small, can really come up. But I try to really think about it and encourage my team to think about that this is about rising smarter every time you do something. And learning is what we're in pursuit of, so that we can really be the best marketers we can.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you mention testing, there are specific validity threats. So if you are engaging in testing and experimentation, make sure you understand those. But I do want to ask you about the team part, because I feel like we live in such a punitive society. I don't mean just marketing. I mean, like, our society's become that way, where like, boy, they're very unforgiving for failure. So I want to ask, what have you done, or what do you do, or if there's any specific examples of something you do to encourage your team and your vendors, whoever, to really go out there and push the envelope? And it's okay to fail as long as we're learning from it. And I came across two examples that I love that I want to share while you're thinking. First of all, I don't know if you saw it, Jerry Seinfeld's commencement speech at Duke. I'm a big Jerry Seinfeld fan, but he said, because he specifically, I love this quote, and I think I shared it with like the hashtag A/B testing, marketing experimentation, something. If you try something and it doesn't work, that's okay too. Most things do not work. Most things are not good. That is part of working in a creative profession, right? Most things don't work. They're not good, right? The other thing I wanted to mention too, a previous interview, I'd had Rich Davis, founder and chief creative officer of ThinkSpark. I interviewed him on how I made it in marketing. And one of his lessons was, most clients would rather have passion versus perfection. And he shared this lesson of somehow they messed up a media buy, and they offered to totally pay the money back to the client. And I mean, it would have been blown a huge hole for the agency, but they offered to do that, and the client turned him down. Said, "Hey, don't worry, we'll shift around our budget." And he felt like they did that because they saw, hey, this agency was working for them. They were passionate. They were really pushing. They were doing a lot of the right things. So you're going to make some mistakes. So, I want to ask you, Kira, like, for your team, for your either your in-house team, for your agencies, like, what can you do to set up that culture of we're going to mess up, but that's okay as long as we're learning, and not make them feel like they can't make any mistakes, or that's it?
Yes. No, that's a great question. And some of those examples remind me of if it was Michael Jordan, which was like, yeah, I won a lot, but I also like all those misses. Yeah, that's in there too.
Wayne Gretzky, I think he said I missed 100% of the shots I never
Yes.
took, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Very much in line with that. So there's a couple things that I do, and I'll say that like this is a muscle that we're building and we're continuing to build. I won't say that we're kind of an expert at this because anytime you are trying to shift a mindset or a cultural behavior of a team and a large team, it's don't think one attempt is enough, right? It's really around repetition does not spoil the prayer here. You have to really continue and work at this. So some of the ways that we're doing it is one. So as part of some of my team town halls, we do these things called fail forwards, which is a little bit of like, hey, here's the test we learned. Here was the strategy or the test we ran. Here was the strategy, which is always important. You have to bring what was the strategy, why did you test it, and what didn't work. And there's not a lot of those, but when they come up, we use that as a catalyst to discuss it, right, and talk about it. I do that. I bring that in with the stuff that we do. We also do case studies that we try to bring in of other brands, especially in a comms. You'll usually have my comms team kind of evaluate, like, what was the miss here? What were some of those elements, and can we kind of do a little bit of those preview or analytics and analysis of what didn't work around us in that space, to just know that like that's a pretty darn good marketing organization, but like those mistakes happen or those things, right, might not have worked. I think one of the things that I have found to be particularly effective in having my team kind of think big or take some of those bolder recommendations, and this might seem super simple, but the most simple things are the things that typically work, is budget tiers. So it's like, hey, this idea is usually grounded in like what we think we can do, or it is, budget restricted. And so I always will ask the team to like give me what like 3x that budget idea would look like, so that we start to build some range where we can either pick apart some things or we try to figure out, hey, the great idea, that big one, that was being blocked by something else. And that usually helps them kind of think about what's possible, but then push beyond it a little bit too. We usually meet in the middle and find a great idea or solution. But those are some of the different ways that we normalize it, we talk about it, we stretch to risk ideas, and things like that.
I love the budget tiers because we do benchmarks, and every year, every marketer, B2B, B2C, anyone we ask, what's your biggest challenge? Not enough budget, right?
I can't fund every idea, not enough budget. I mean, that's always going to be the case.
And Kiara, it would have worked if we had a bigger budget. That's why I failed. Like,
totally. I wonder if like Geico, has that. They're notorious for their budget size. Do they ever feel like they don't have enough?
Yeah, sure. We could have bought every single ad in the country instead of every third ad, right? Then it would have worked. Okay, those are some great lessons from some of the things Kara has made. In just a moment, we're going to look at some of the lessons from people she has made them with, because that's a great thing we get to do as marketers. We get to make things. We get to make them with people. Before we get there, though, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. Right now, you can get a 3-month free full scholarship to the AI Guild at join.meclabsai.com to help you prepare for the artificial intelligence marketing revolution. That's join.meclabsai.com to get the most out of AI. All right, let's take a look at some of the lessons you learned from people you worked with. You first mentioned Mike Linton, and you said from Mike you learned that hand grenade math is good enough. Don't chase false precision. By the way, everyone thinks they are a brand marketer. So I love just the name hand grenade math is so visceral. I love that. So tell us how you learned that lesson.
Yes. Gosh, I learned so many things from Mike, and he had so many one-liners. But I think the thing that used to come up most often, and because I was focused on brand strategy and brand media work at the time with him, and so we were heavy in a lot of these conversations where, everyone had an opinion, right, about something, and our certain ideas would either get like super watered down, or we were solving for too many things, and he'd be like, no, like the first problem is you got to clear out the room. You got to get less people in, just a few experts that like are deeply knowledgeable about the thing you're solving for, and you really trust their opinion. And you're like, okay, let's clear out the room. Like, who do we really identify are those true brand experts that are like deeply kind of building that skill set and that knowledge, because it is such if you really find those experts, it's just a massive strategic unlock. But so one of those elements of just like, let's clear out the room for the true experts and really try to lean into that and let that be your guiding principle when it comes to brand strategy work on that front. The hand grenade math part, that came up so often, and he would always use that. But for me, that was a really great, and I took it with me as a key way to think about when we're just trying to get too precise around things that just at the end of the day, A, don't really matter. B, if you've ever done any forecasting, there's so many assumptions that just get layered in and you build on top of. And then by the end, you're like, okay, I'm 4 assumptions deep. Do I think this will be accurate, or am I chasing kind of false precision around things? Whether that's with my partners in FP&A or any of our analysts. And so this idea of like, hey, hand grenade math, am I going to be off by a couple $1,000s here of potential, or a couple hundred users, and you start to really think about scale in a different way. If I'm in blast radius of a hand grenade, that's likely good enough. And so how do you know when to chase precision versus not? And so much of the time he would kind of say that back to us and challenge some of that thinking. And I was like, you're right. This is a hand grenade math opportunity. Like, that makes a ton of sense. Let's just move. And that thinking helps a lot of marketers be able to move a lot quicker too. I know getting to certain accuracy in some of those areas, but kind of freeing us up to move a little quicker. It's a really helpful phrase that I just return back to every now and then.
Okay, I love that idea because I'm horrible at forecasting and numbers. But so take us through, how do you sell an idea internally? Like, because I imagine the CFO or other folks on board, like, they do want to know a certain level of precision. And I mean, there is certain forecasts where, I don't know if you're working with sales, if you're working with whoever,
Yeah.
you got to hit some numbers. You're reporting it up to other people. So, I mean, I like that idea. I think sometimes that we get too focused on that. And like you said, I love this 4 assumptions deep, because like, oh, well, if all this hits exactly, this will happen. And it's like, that never happens, right? That never happens. So how do you do it? So you've got those general numbers. That's great. Now take us in, sell it to the CFO now, or sell to whoever you need to sell it to get that budget, who also has to probably put out to either your investors or the public or whatever, some very specific numbers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think the key element of this that I use and that I think is been successful is really thinking about this general principle, right, of like aggressive versus conservative. Right. So if you're always going to have to forecast the impact of something. You're always going to have to size, right, the potential of an opportunity, or, a rough CPA, like, cost per acquisition of launching a new channel, or something to that degree. But this idea of, okay, if I, on a conservative lens, am here, of what I think that value can be, and on an aggressive lens, with I have all those assumptions stacked, where will I land? And if that margin of difference is like, hey, in both cases, okay for the business, okay for us, then like we should move, right? And so it's not about not doing the work to get the rigor behind the decisions, or the presenting to the CFO and making sure that that's the case. It's really about not letting perfection be the enemy of good. And how do you think about ranges of decision making and ranges of loss, right? If I don't do this thing, am I leaving $500,000 on the table, or hey, could I have actually unlocked in the future multi-million dollars of revenue for a business? And so how do you use it to really shape that degree of comfort and risk? And so we use it in that range of like, in both cases, we should probably move, right? And are we okay with that level of potential loss in a low scenario or not? And so using it to just kind of bring up some thinking also has been effective.
So obviously there's math in the, financials and the ROI and trying to get those budgets. There's also math in all that data we have flowing through, right? And you say a lesson you learned from Jenny Lewis is stay data informed, but lead with vision and strategy. So again, it seems like you're trying to figure out, how do I use the numbers, but not get like locked in the prison of the numbers?
Yes. So, gosh, I've had the wonderful privilege to work with Jenny now for a couple years, and she is just a powerhouse of strategy. So she came to the Not Worldwide from Uber, and just has been a powerhouse of strategic thinking. And I find that the value and the focus that I learned from her of just being super strategy led has been really important. And the reason why it has been particularly important is because it really has helped make decisions and trade-offs a lot easier, right? Like, there are great ideas everywhere. There's way too many than we can ever fund, or way too many that we have the capacity to execute. And so being strategy led really helps us to narrow in on okay, this one ticks a strategic box, and that's why we're gonna move forward with something. I think it's also an area where, as you're looking at your company and the way in which you can influence direction, if you can influence direction around being, strategy led, it's really impactful to bring everyone together to a shared, view, or a shared vision of what success will look like. When I say this potentially controversial idea of being data informed as opposed to data led, I think I, of course, live in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and coming from a tech background, we are always talking about data informed decision making, right? Data informed decision making, true and true. And one of the things that, while I think that is absolutely vital and you need to be data proficient, there is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. There is also a true limitation to data. If you're really trying to innovate and if you're building a product for a customer that doesn't exist or traffic that is not coming to your website yet, A/B testing is not going to be as relevant, right, in that experience. And so sometimes there is a lack of data, or there is a lack of that information available when you really do need to lean into strategy. And so knowing the difference, knowing when some KPIs might be too, strict, that are going to limit innovation. How do you make those trade-offs, and how do you build comfort around that? That's where it's one of the things I've learned from her that I try to remind myself of as often when those situations come up, to really try to make sure that we're using data to make as informed decisions as possible and be as smart as we can, but also making sure that we're following a given strategy, or we're in pursuit, right, of this innovation forward.
Yeah. So you mentioned something really interesting before. You said you had a certain strategy for ancestry, but the execution didn't work correctly, right? So I wonder if you can take us through, like in this example too, like how can you tell when it's the strategy or when it's the execution? Because I can see, and a lot of times you can see, oh, the data shows it didn't work, right? Because data is just numbers. It's really the interpretation of them. But is it the strategy or the execution? I remember working with a company, and their commercials, it was a security product. It was a very serious product. And the commercials are very flippant. They're like fun and funny and stuff. And I really told, I said, I really think this is the wrong strategy. It's a security company. I mean, like you're off on a business trip and your home gets broken into and you're worried about your wife and your children. And like, I don't want to see something funny. And they're like, no, we've tested it. It works. We've tested it. It works. And so finally I had to be like, all right, walk me through these tests. And what they did is they focus grouped it. Right. And so that, again, they had data, but I would argue there's a different experience of being in a focus group where you're getting paid for it, a gift card in a mall, whatever. You want to see something entertaining versus, again, a security company, your house just got broken into. So I think that's a great example of, yeah, you can be data driven, but where'd you get the data? How'd you get the data? So I wonder if you can kind of help us be able to parse that. This great thing you said earlier. Well, there's a strategy and there's an execution, and it might be the right strategy, but the wrong execution, or it's just the wrong strategy.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think for me, when I know that a strategy is sound and right, two things are likely universally true. One, the customer problem is the right one we're solving. And you'd be surprised that like it can take a little while to actually get to the right customer problem to solve. Whether that's, hey, is it a big enough problem that is actually felt by enough people, or am I kind of building a solution for a very niche audience? So really understanding, like, is that the right customer problem to be solving, or the business one for that matter, whether it's competitive disruption or something to that degree. So one, is the problem the right one to solve? Number one. Number two, is the solution we are proposing truly fixing that customer problem? Now, that can play into, of course, product market fit. It could play into a marketing messaging problem, right? And the example of like, hey, customer urgency. We knew we had to increase customer urgency in that previous example, but also that we knew, hey, if you learned something about yourself today that would change the way that you live for the future, that solves that problem. The way in which we show you what those things are, what are those inspirational things that will change your life, is where the execution wasn't quite right, and where we were going to take a number of different paths forward. And I think that comes up so many times with creative, to your great example of creative testing. Right? Are we either asking the right questions and focus grouping, or are we throwing enough various stimulus to a given audience? That counts for painted door testing as well. Are there enough right versions of stimulus, right? Or we're building out a product, and are there enough creative versions telling different value propositions against this particular creative to learn our way in, and find some similarities and traits? So I find that once we know, hey, again, customer problem is right, our proposed solution and offering is also right, then it really becomes around like, okay, that go-to market strategy, that's probably where we have the most room and opportunity to adjust and figure out. And you have to balance that with the runway and the budgets you have to do that right. But any sort of variations you can do or build into that, or any pre-testing you can do to be as informed as possible, will usually set you up for far more success.
All right, so we've talked about business and customer problems. We've talked about building solutions for those and the right strategies and stuff. But here's another word you bring up, and I wonder how it fits into all of it. You said purpose. Purpose. There's another word. Be purpose led. You said you learned this from Vineet Mehra. So how did you learn this from Vineet? How does it all fit in with everything we've talked about so far?
Yes. Well, Vineet. If anyone has had the pleasure and the opportunity to work with or for Vineet, I feel like no one can get a marketer more charged up and excited about a vision of what we can do together. And I just I have such fond memories of just being so inspired by him, and he was a hugely influential in my career as far as thinking about and pushing me to truly challenge myself and challenge my thinking and push us forward. And so I view him in that. But one of the things that was so important to him in my time with him was this idea of really leveraging the purpose of a product, service, or brand. What role are you playing in society, or you're trying to play, and really coming back to that whenever possible. Right. Can that truly be the anchor of a marketing organization? Can that really be the anchor of a product organization? We sometimes get so caught into the day to day that you'd be surprised at how much we don't actually think about purpose and the role that plays. And so if you can try to infuse that into everything, you show that to your customers, you can bring that in. It's a hugely motivating a place to work from and operate from. And it's one where, for me, really thinking about purpose and brands that do purpose really, really well, it's something that I like to really focus on. And frankly, it's what makes me like marketing and working for the companies that I do. On a personal note, it really drives me to want to lean into a lot of just kind of mentorship work that I do. It brings in my passion for DE&I in a huge way. For the work that I do, it led me to establishing our entire DE&I strategy for Ancestry. It also led me to really make sure that I joined, and I'm an executive sponsor for an ERG group with the Knot right now, and making sure that that's core to our impact work for the company. It's why our corporate social responsibility programs for the Knot are becoming more and more important as we think about our broad strategy, right? Of how do we support more and more wedding professionals, small business owners that are entering the wedding space. And so when you really kind of figure out, okay, what is our purpose? Why are we existing? And you move that as an anchor into strategy, I found it to be really quite impactful for both me, why I come to work, why other marketers come to work, but it's also something that can be a really great rally cry to unify a lot of different teams that you might work with.
All right. So at How I Made It Marketing, let me warn you, never try to stay surface level. We got to dig into it. That's the point. That's why we're having these conversations. We got to dig it into and understand these ideas. And Garrett, already you seem like someone I could dig into this with. So I want to say purpose. Like, boy, that sounds good at a surface level. But boy, is the devil in the details. So let me ask you, and I'll give an example. Like, do you have specific example of how you've aligned a purpose and a value proposition? Because we talked before about, hey, let's see how other brands failed. This is where might be one of the hardest things to do as a marketer lately. And this is where a lot of brands have stumbled in figuring out what is the purpose and how is it aligned with what's going on in society and our brand. But one example that I like, you mentioned Airbnb previously when I was looking at your application, and I'd interviewed Cordula Flugel, the marketing director of TNW, on How I Made It Marketing. And one of her lessons from earlier in her career was market localization is important. And she told the story about Airbnb experiences in Africa where she lived, and how, at first they were trying to come in as a global company and they were going to do this like one size fits all approach. And then they learned no, this is going to work if it's hyper localization. That's what's going to make it work. It really became about the local cultures and the communities and the lifestyles, and not just about some, big brand coming in and telling them how to do stuff. And so to me, that I was thinking okay, that to me is a great example of purpose. It's well aligned with the value proposition of the organization, and it does seem to be truly serving a community, a group of people in a way. However, I also see, like you mentioned some acronyms, people feel like they have to follow certain acronyms and they don't understand how their brand fits into society, either because they get involved in a conversation that maybe their customers, not all their customers, but some of their customers would want to, because their customers don't want them to support that. Or the worst thing is they support it and their customers are like, what are you doing supporting this? Like, I don't believe it. You're just trying to sell me something. So I think that's a long way of saying, one, Kira, you can correct me on any of this, and I may be 100% off base, and I'm fine trying to stumble through this cultural conversation we're all going through. But also, can you think of a specific example in your career of how you've done that tricky thing of align a brand and a value proposition and a purpose?
Yes, no, I can. I'll give you a couple examples here because I think you're right, right? Like this idea of purpose can be so broad and lofty. It's often hard to translate it into the day-to-day actions you might take and how do you be truly anchored to that. I'll give you two examples. I'll do Ancestry because like their purpose is just written all over, right? That product, that service, the work that's done is just so transformative. But this idea of their real purpose was to discover, preserve, and share. And so when we were building out marketing strategy, we would really try to anchor to like, okay, what can we do that is actually helping to fuel discovery? Come to the platform, discover something, right? This idea of preservation, we would be super focused on what are some of the ways that we could innovate around preservation. That led us to a lot of social media work. We had one campaign that we did, which was about Winter Olympics, and we created these like kind of sports cards, like baseball cards. But in those baseball cards was actually the information that you had discovered within your family tree, and so that was like a preservation element that we wanted you to be able to take and be able to share. And so we would find little elements of like, okay, how does this thing? How do you get it to actually share on social? How do you actually get it to be an element of this particular campaign that you could share with your family, right? Is there a nugget in here that would actually allow us to do that on that front? At the Knot, our purpose and sort of our vision at the Knot is around celebrating the moments that make us, and so we do that and we incorporate that with a lot of internal things like our town halls and our marketing leadership meetings, our marketing town hall meetings, where we actually celebrate and we pull up every significant life event that happened for anyone in marketing, whether that's buying a house or everyone that got engaged or just had a baby, and we make it a thing, and we do that. We take that and we mean it literally with our influencer strategy, where we're like, no, we're going to gift you for your engagement. We're going to celebrate that thing that happened, or even if it's post stage, we'll follow that relationship through with the bump, our parenting brand, right, and gifting when that moment happens overall. Another one is this ability to support small business pros during COVID, which was like the massive pause button for the industry overall, right? Weddings above all else were highly paused at that time, but it was really important that we created a funding relief strategy for pros that we know were going to be massively disrupted. And so that was one of the leading things that we prioritized doing at the time with a $10 million relief fund and to get our industry through it. And that was, as a leader in that industry, it was really about these moments that are going to make us and how do we make decisions that really support that all the way through the way we go to market and the things that we do. So it's about finding those kind of tactical things that you should be doing, and it's the right thing to do connected to your purpose. But it can be big and small, right? It can be an element in a campaign. It can be a huge funding relief strategy. It can be the way in which you lead your team meetings too, and reminding all of us of that.
That's great specific examples. And first of all, thank you for helping us all navigate through this. There's great specific examples and showing how it can be big or small, and it doesn't. I mean, sometimes we feel like there's this big cultural conversation and we got to be there and we got to say that exact right thing versus finding where do we fit into the customer's life and how can we do it in many different ways. And not every brand can do it in the biggest way possible. $10 million for helping small businesses is a great example, but there's probably some small businesses out there that can help in little ways too. Last lesson here, and really just ties into the whole what we're trying to do with how I made it marketing. Never be complacent or stagnant. Always keep learning. We're all always trying to keep learning. So I love this. You said you learned this from Tim Chi. How did you learn this lesson?
Yes. So Tim Chi is our CEO, and gosh, one of the most just optimistic and future forward leaders that I've gotten to really work with and collaborate with. And he says this thing, which is like, hey, you got to be a learn it all, not a know it all. And how are you thinking about the next thing you're going to learn that's going to make you smarter, be able to share that knowledge with someone else? And so some of the ways that he's done that and really created a lot of just, I guess, momentum within our leadership team around are things like it's huge. I mean, first and foremost was the biggest lead for us when it came to like AI, which is like, how are you using it everyone go try testing this thing. Let's go figure out this. What is the gap? And really kind of challenging us with some of those questions that force us to go learn, figure it out, think about it. Or sometimes it'll be, massive podcast sharing around this like new thing and this new principle, and it'll have nothing to do with our industry. But this idea that like you can learn and apply principles broadly, he is always key on sharing that and talking about that. When he gets on stage or we have him on, keynote type things, there's always this element in his presentations around the future that he wants to make sure that is always incorporated. And so using this kind of forward looking view as an element of like, you don't know it today, but you should know it tomorrow, as a catalyst for all of us to really kind of go learn and figure something out. And so using it as a presentation topic is a great way that he's done that and that I've learned from him. And I try to incorporate as I think about different presentations I might give or things like that as well. But what are you learning next? And even if it's not specifically about your job or your industry, there's so many things that we can actually leverage, just skill sets, knowledge, that we should always try to bring that ongoing into our everyday life.
I mean, where do you go to learn? Where do you go for inspiration? Because the one thing I love you said doesn't have to be about our industry. One place I go, I love hearing about stand-up comedy, the process. I mean, I like stand-up comedy, but the process behind it. I listen to podcasts and watch interviews because to me, you mentioned entertainment. We as marketers can learn so much from that, right? It's you're setting up a value proposition. That's the setup. You've got a conversion. People are going to laugh or they're not. How are people going to go? And so kind of, I mean, obviously I love the craft of marketing. That's why we're doing this, right? But I love like hearing about the craft of other artistic or creative endeavors really kind of helps me get thinking and inspired about our industry in a new way. As you mentioned, the entertainment element, I think that can be a part of it. So what are some other things? I'm just curious, where do you go to learn other than, about your industry?
Yeah, no, that's great. So there's a couple of things. I love that example about comedy. It almost makes me want to go and watch more of it and think about that, because you're right in the setup and making sure that you have that punch or you deliver right against what you've just set up is such a great analogy. But some of the things that I do. So I send this weekly memo to my whole team, my whole department, and it's really like what I was inspired by this week. And a lot of the examples I pull in will be like articles that I read about random topics, and I try to like pull it into or relate it to something about either like marketing or about a content article that we could be leaning into. I use social, and there's just so much education right now just floating around on social, or even examples of creative work, like true creative work. So whether that's following painters and watching some of the kind of time-lapse painting photography, a lot of it is like ASMR type. Why is that appealing to me as a user, right? What is that relief? And so I take a lot of like art just broadly as a category and try to weave that in as an inspiration and how I'm thinking about either delighting someone or why am I intrigued by that, or why are we intrigued by that? I think podcasts, one of the big ones for me that I'm really interested in is just overall like just mental health and like this idea of self-improvement and some of these core principles. And so I try to spend a little bit of time thinking about that, and that of course has a connection to leadership, but there's some elements that I think are just broadly applicable, like this idea of resilience that I spoke about earlier, or where hidden biases might exist in preference, right, or decision making that we need to think about, or if it's about leadership development and building trust and how perceptions of trust are built. And so I like studying and reading or listening to podcasts about some of those broader principles. And I think about how that often makes me think differently about my work, or some of the creativity that I'm trying to inspire from the team, or that I might be looking at. So some of those broader topics also help me with that.
Yeah, I opened this podcast by saying we're an ideas industry, and the human brain works in a funny way. I don't totally get it, but I know like I got to put a lot of stuff in it, because then I'm going to be thinking about this challenge, and somehow one of those things I put in it is going to pop an idea for this challenge. So I love the breadth of your inspirations, right? I mean, one of the things I would always hate is when someone would come to me from Marketing Sherpa and be like, oh, you don't have a case study for my business. And I'm like, oh, you're in the automotive industry. Let's say we have one of those. I was like, no, but I'm not an OEM supplier. I'm a secondary part supplier. And so that doesn't apply to me. What I would love is, I remember we did a case study once at the time, and this isn't political, I'm not taking any sides, but the Obama campaign had done more A/B testing than anyone at the time, the 2012 re-election campaign. We did a case study about that. And then I love it. Some very different businesses, obviously that's politics, would come and say, oh, that inspired us to do this or that or whatever. And that was just such a great example. So different from your industry, but learning is everywhere. It's everywhere.
Oh, yeah. I mean, honestly, political campaign strategy, there's so many parallels to marketing. So like, if that is an area that you want to observe from like a periphery, there's a lot of parallels there that I think that's really fruitful for learning as well.
Well, we both call it campaigns, right?
So. Yeah, exactly. That too.
Well, we talked about so many different things about what it means to be a marketer, Kara. If you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
It's a great question. Okay, so for me, and one of the things that I find myself gravitating to, whether I'm interviewing or I'm really thinking about kind of some of the top talent that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years, and it is really someone that has this balance of left and right brain thinking. It is, some of the most effective marketers have been really, creative, and they're able to identify some of these cultural moments and be able to kind of tap some cultural tension. They're always thinking about, how do I spin the next product thing, right? How do I create more kind of relevancy and intrigue around an existing product where in some cases might not have a truly robust product pipeline, for example. And that creativity can really rise to the top and make you incredibly successful and compelling. But the truth of the matter is you need to be able to translate that into business value and business value delivery. And so you've got to do the math. We've got to be able to understand it, be able to translate that, really become friends with data and know when it will serve you and when it won't, and how to really connect those dots. That's true, I believe, marketing magic that will really make a really successful marketer. And then the last trait I will say is I'm going to go back to this idea of resilience, right? It's having this confidence. It really shows up for me in two ways. It's like knowing that you will rise again better, and making sure that you can build confidence around that. And it's also about this not having this fear of risk taking, right? We want that innovation, and our industry needs it. And if we can really build some confidence around knowing that, you'll rise and you'll be smarter, and people will understand that, that you can kind of build some true resilience, will make you pretty badass.
Well, I think that resilience, the key thing is the people that are listening now, hearing you just transparently share some of your, for lack of a better word, failures. I wouldn't call them that, but things that didn't work out, I think is really helpful. So thank you, Kara, for being so transparent with us and sharing so much of your career with us today.
Of course, it has been an absolute pleasure, and thank you. I really appreciate the time, and the chat has been a great experience.
Awesome, Ben. Thank you to everyone for listening. I hope you found value as well.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketing, SHERPA.com.